But the reason why I decided to do this is because coming off of Father's Day, I did a message at Unity Church in Boulder, Colorado. And I've never spoken at a Unity Church before. And what I found in speaking in this context is that my personal faith journey, spiritual journey, whatever you want to call it, which has been deeply informed by, I guess, what one would call the father wound, um, is a lot bigger than the religious context that I grew up in. And so, as I spoke to this group of people who have, guess, communal access to a lot more nuanced spirituality, I found that I was able to explore things that I haven't really explored when talking about the father wound. And so I decided, hey, Kathy, hey, Buell. So I decided that um, since I had this opportunity to speak in a community that did have a broader spiritual access, that I would take full advantage of that and share more deeply. And for me personally, my father wound healing process, um, it started really young. I was about 2 when my mom and dad split, and I remember that being my first introduction to my willpower not being powerful enough to change the world, because I tried to will my dad to come back home and I was not able to do that. And I'm sure a lot of young people and a lot of young men in particular who have father wounds, um, those kinds of severing moments can really set the tone for the rest of their life. I was fortunate in that uh, the first person I decided to project onto a father figure was happened to be the stories I heard about Jesus. And so for a long time, my way of dealing with my father wound was to get engaged with reading the Bible, reading the red letters in particular. I used to read the red letters like I guess they were going out of style. I really liked them just because they were red. I was like, wow, this is the only book with letters that are red, and it's about this guy that I care about. So I kept reading and reading, and I found that I was increasingly projecting my dad onto Jesus, because my dad wasn't there to dispute whether he was like Jesus or not. So that's what I was doing. And not only that, I was really desperate to find someone to be a father figure for me. And I used to literally go up to people and just ask them, like, ask guys, like, hey, do you have any kids? And if they said no, I'm like, do you want a son? And I was trying to basically sell myself as a son to random men that I would just meet in different places. And a lot of times they guys would just look at me like I was crazy. Sometimes they would laugh. Sometimes they would say, "What's your mom look like?" But it was how I was handling things. But I also grew up in a context where there were not a lot of dads around for a variety of reasons. Largely, in some people's cases, it was the war on drugs and things like that that took a lot of dads away. In my case, it was another woman that took my dad away. But that kind of wound and that desire to have uh, a father figure, I think, is really pervasive, and we see it playing out on our social and national landscape. I really think that a lot of these guys out here who are following all these dudes in the manosphere, they are trying to find a father figure. They still have a daddy wound that they haven't healed, and they are finding very toxic ways of being able to engage with that emptiness that they feel for not having a dad, or a dad that lived up to whatever projection they put onto a father. One of the things I realized probably when I was about 15 years old is when I realized that I was projecting onto my dad, and it wasn't really his responsibility to be what I imagined him to be. And I came to that awareness because one day I was talking about talking about my dad to some uh, guys, and they were like, "Man, you don't have a daddy. I ain't never seen your dad before. You always talk about your dad, but I don't think you have a dad." And they were just kind of joking me. And I saw this guy drive by, and I could have sworn it was my dad. And I was like, "Oh my God, that's my dad right there." And they were like, "You lying?" And I said, "No, that is my dad." And I started running down the street, chasing this car, thinking it was my dad. And then this car turns down the street, turns onto my street. I'm like, oh my God, it is my dad. And he's driving a black Mustang. And I'm like in my mind imagining that other kids are gonna see my dad and be like, yo, this guy really does have a dad. And this guy pulls into my driveway, my family's driveway. And then I'm like 100% sure it's my dad. And he's knocking on the door. And from the back, he actually looks like my dad. But when he turns around, he doesn't look exactly like my dad, but he looks similar to my dad. How freaky is that? And I look at him, I go, Dad? Because something didn't look right. And then he goes, No. And then he goes, I'm looking for Pedro Silva. And I'm like, I'm Pedro Silva. He said, No, an adult. So he was looking for my dad. This dude who sort of looked like my dad was looking for my dad, and it so happened he was from my dad's country. And I said, well, why are you looking for my dad? And he said, oh, he bought a Kirby vacuum cleaner like 13 years ago, and I wanted to check in on him to see if he still wanted a new Kirby vacuum cleaner. And I was like, flummoxed, if that's the word that I could use. And when my mom and dad split up, the only thing my dad took was that stinking Kirby vacuum cleaner. And this guy was from my dad's country, and I guess like 13 years ago, he sold my dad this vacuum cleaner. And I was so hurt that this dude wasn't my dad. And I thought to ask him, well, do you want to be my dad? Because he's gone. And then I had this reconciliation. I said, man, hold on. I've been spending a lot of time wanting somebody to be my dad. And for a while, I had a crazy stepdad, abusive pastor stepdad, which was not a good bargain. So I was still dealing with that at 15. And then I got really angry at my dad for not being the person that I wanted him to be. And then something said, you know what? You're the one who has been projecting this on this guy. You're the one that's been, fantasizing about a father figure all your life and projecting onto Jesus and all these other things. That like you own that projection. And it was you that was running down the street screaming, Dad, Dad, Dad. And meanwhile, your real dad does not know that this is even happening. And he doesn't know you're mad at him either. And it's not affecting anything. And in that moment, I decided to stop. And when I did, something happened to me. I became my own father figure, essentially. And I had been doing it all the years before, but I definitely became conscious of that role that I chose to play for myself. And everything around me changed. Kids who used to pick on me stopped picking on me. Like, all of a sudden I became somewhat like an authority in my community and all these things because I was embodying the father energy. I didn't realize that till about 30 years later, but I was embodying this father energy and there was so many people who were longing for it that I became, for lack of a better word, attracted to people. But I didn't want to be that for people. I wanted to help people find that in themselves. And so if you're up here today, if you see this video later, uh, all of us, unless you have the perfect father, many of us have father wounds. And from those father wounds, we project a lot of things onto the world and onto other people. We have mother wounds too, but we're talking about fathers today. Uh, and out of those projections, we create a world, and that world is not always pretty. But what would it be like if we took responsibility for those projections? What if we chose to be the influence that we wish we had? What if we chose to be, whether we're male, female, or whatever our gender expression is, that we still have that energy that we uh, are clinging to or looking for, and that is usually imagined to be a father. So the fatherly energy, whoever it is, however it is, what if we took responsibility for that and chose to be that energy in the world and to be that space and that presence for ourselves first and then for others in our communities, and that we were able to kind of build compassion for the emptiness that a lot of people feel from this, these core wounds. And I think about it a lot. And as I'm like past 30 years of working on this for myself, and I feel like I've come into a place where I really want to help other people do it. And when I gave that message at the Unity Church a couple of days ago, I could see it, how it was tapping into people and how like a lot of emotion came up for folks. That's why I'm doing this now, this conversation now. It was because some of these people in their 60s and 70s and 80s even, and they still have this father wound that is really prevalent in their life. So what do we do with that? How do we use that awareness to build more compassion? How do we look at people who we see acting out in certain ways who may just be living out of that father wound or mother wound? But again, today we're talking about fathers. And what would it be like to create systems that kind of made space for people to heal through that in a healthy way? And what if our communities were mindful of that? One of the things I struggled with as a pastor, it's funny that in, the Catholic tradition, they call the pastors father. There's no, I don't think that's a coincidence. But I was frustrated in my final kind of year or so in faith communities because I was like, how are we equipping people to live more fully into who they can be? I think it's faith communities have a purpose, right? I believe. But I believe that there are places for us to heal and for us to go into these places and emerge from them um, better off than who we were when we came in so that we can then be of service to the world. And if we don't know what the core wounds are that are uh, challenging people and damaging people, then how can we serve them? That's the question. And so as I start to kind of imagine where I can be of service, I'm thinking about things like the father wound, the mother wound, core relationships, core motivations that we still struggle with, that a lot of us developed our survival uh, instincts at an early age, and we use the survival instincts to help us survive our childhood in areas where they no longer apply. And that kind of conflicts with other people's ways of surviving. What if we created more spaces for people to uh, get intimate with the pain, the core wounds, the core motivations, and be able to kind of talk through that and heal through that in a holistic way, and then go out into the world being an invitational presence to other people? What would that be like? That's the question that I'm kind of living into. I know that for a long time, as I was talking about earlier about my dad, I was shaped. First, I was shaped by trying to be who I imagined my dad to be. Then, when I realized my dad wasn't who I thought he was, then I was shaped by trying not to be how I thought he was. And then eventually, I came to the place where I was like, my identity can't be I am not my dad. So I had to live into my own identity. And in order to do that, I had to be honest with myself about the things that were motivating me, the things that were angering me, the things that I reflected on, and the things that I projected out into the world. And I had to take responsibility for all of those things and then try to use that human tendency to project in a positive way so that I can take that same tendency and try to project positivity in the world. Because many of us, because of core wounds and different things that are running underneath, we project our fear onto the world. We go into conversations afraid that somebody's going to say something to us that's going to harm us the same way we got harmed a long time ago. And it's natural, but we can't build a world where more people can thrive if all of us have our defense mechanisms turned on. I mean, not to get too far in this, but we look at the way our countries are functioning or not functioning right now, and it's just a manifestation of how we are as individuals. All of us have, not all of us, but very many of us have our defenses up 90% of the time. We get into conversations and we're waiting for something to happen. And what if we didn't show up that way? What if we came into conversations curious? What if we came in with compassion and when we saw people exhibiting certain behaviors, because we were intimate enough with our own internal working, we can be able to say, hey, I know that I've come from this place and healed through it. Then I can listen to that person and be able to help usher them more fully into presence. I'll tell you an example. I was at a vigil some years back, and it was a combined vigil, both for unarmed Black people who have been killed by the police, but it was also a joint vigil because there was someone who had killed a bunch of police officers, I think in Texas, in retaliation. And so we were holding a joint space. And that was a tender, intense situation. But there was one white guy that came in and he felt it was his calling, I guess, to every time they named an unarmed Black person who had been harmed by the police, this guy would yell out like thug, gangster. And he would say some stupid things. And I was watching this guy and I said, man, this guy's terrified right now. and he is acting out this way because of out of his fear. And so I said, listen, sir, this is a joint vigil. My invitation to you is to be quiet when you hear names that you have some feelings for in honor the other people here. And then when we get to the stage where we're um, lifting up candles for the police officers, then you can say what you have to say then, you know, and but he couldn't stop himself. So then again, I said, sir, listen, I know you're scared right now. I know you're afraid, and this is why you're acting this way. And we went through this about 3 times until finally he said, why do you keep saying I'm afraid? I'm not afraid. And I said, I'm saying you're afraid because I've been afraid before. And when I was, my face looked just like your face. And as soon as I said that, you could see like this whole veneer fall off of this guy. And he got quiet, and then he never said another thing. And then at the end, he actually sat with some students from the local college and had a conversation with them. I don't know what happened afterwards, but I know that had I not been present with my own challenges and my own fears and witnessed them and how they shaped me and then worked with them, I would not have been able to honestly recognize it in him. And I wouldn't have been able to invite him into something different. And a lot of us, unfortunately, have not been able to get ourselves to do the work. A lot of us are still hurting, and rightly so. But there's healing available. Just like how we say that hurt people, heal people can heal people. Not with magical powers or anything like that, but just with presence, just being able to be with people and say, I know what it's like to, in this case, have a father wound, and still be working on it at creeping on 50 years old. But I've done a lot of work in that area. And so I can hold that space with you as you work through yours. But if we haven't worked on ours, what the heck are we going to do for anybody else? You can't give somebody what you don't have. And unfortunately, many of our institutions have not been structured to actually meet people where they are. We have this kind of production line system where we're just trying to create automatons to keep the system going. And we're not trying to actually engage real people. And we can't expect the system to be any different because it was designed by hurt people. And they're not going to do any better. They can't do any better. And I don't mean it in a mean way. But those of us who choose to be healed and to become whole and to look at the wounds and to work with them, we can create better systems. One of my favorite quotes is from this guy named Buckminster Fuller, who says, you can't change things by fighting the existing reality. You have to create a new reality that makes the old system obsolete. And many of us don't, I don't know if we even think of that. I hope that those of you who are on here now um, can kind of take that to heart, and we can kind of spread that word to people that we can create new things. We can create new communities, new systems that are emerging out of our wholeness and not out of our fear and our defensiveness and our open wounds that are still bleeding all over the place, you know. um yeah, I know I'm going to continue to work on this father piece. When I got invited to speak, this church actually, or this faith community or spiritual center, had asked me to speak several times before, but because I wasn't from their tradition, I just had said no. But when they asked me to speak for Father's Day, I said yes because I took it as the universe like supporting me in my own journey, and also being a father and really trying to be a partner in my children's becoming. I thought that it would be a good opportunity to kind of unearth some things that maybe I wouldn't have thought about if I hadn't had that invitation. So that's why I said yes to it. And now that I have, I know that I can have to continue to do some more work in that space. So for those of you who are up here, I see Sharon says speak. For those of you who are up here, if you want to put anything in the chat, is there anything that you all are curious about when it comes to healing father wounds or, fatherly wounds or anything like that that you want to share that we can kind of discuss a little further? I'm just now getting into this live stream thing without another person on the other end talking to me, so there's a little clunkiness going on. But is there anything that comes up for you all when you think about healing father wounds that you think might be important, or areas in our life where you see the father wound at play, like the Joe Rogan experience. Like I think that's a lot of guys who need a hug, like real bad, that follow that kind of stuff. But any thoughts that you want to share? If not, I'll continue to ramble for a little bit. Okay, Sharon says, I'm a former nurse home visitor that visited with mostly women and children. I believe programs that, and it stopped at that. So I'll wait for the rest of that statement. But yeah, I could imagine it being a of people in need, relational need, which we don't think a lot about in a society where we get taught to be a rugged individualist. We don't really think about the relational needs of people. Like people assume that we're going to grow up and become independent people. That's there's no such thing as that. That's the biggest lie, and sadly, a lot of men get taught that. And I know, just to tell some crazy stories about my dad. I was telling someone this yesterday. My dad used to always say, "Be a man," but when he said "be a man," it was always like the toxic, the toxic version. And one time, hold on, let me see what Randall's saying. Okay, let me finish with Sharon's and then I'll come back to my dad's crazy story. She said, oops. So, going back, I believe programs that provide services to men and youth are important. Many programs are not created to serve the needs of men. What is your opinion about that? Absolutely. I think because of what I was saying a minute ago about this illusion of rugged individualism and men trying to be manly men who don't need anybody, I think that a lot of men don't allow themselves to be vulnerable enough to admit that they need help or to admit that they need services. I used to be that way, honestly. But eventually I was able to realize that that's not healthy and that the modeling that I got that taught me that was lacking. Just to go into the story before I get to Randall's piece is we were coming back from Cape Verde and my dad was like, I said, Dad, it's kind of late. We were driving from New York to back to Mississippi. And my dad did not want to stop and get a hotel room. And I said, Dad, it's kind of late. We should take a rest or something before we try to drive straight from the airport to Mississippi coming back from Africa. And this guy is like, be a man. I'm like, what the heck? And then he says, I'll drive, then you can sleep, and then you'll drive, and I can sleep, or whatever the case may be. And I'm like, all right, well, we can give it a shot. And then this dude is driving and he keeps talking to me. And I'm like, he told me he wanted me to sleep and while he drove, but he's talking to me the whole time. And then he's like, okay, I'm getting tired. It's your turn to drive. And I said, Dad, uh, I understand that you think that we can make it without stopping, but listen, you were talking to me. Now I didn't sleep. Now it's my turn to drive. And, he said, well, I'll just stay awake and talk to you and keep you awake, which is defeating the purpose, right? So then I start driving. I look over. This dude's leaning over to the side, knocked out. Not too many. I don't know how many minutes passed later, but I also fell asleep driving and crashed his new truck. Was scraping up against the barriers, sparks flying, and I'm not present in the mind. I stomp on the gas instead of the brake, so I make it worse, and we end up swerving into a ditch in some middle of nowhere, Alabama, in darkness. And if some old white lady actually picked us up, which was a miracle in and of itself. But we ended up having to get a hotel anyway. But now his truck was wrecked because he wanted to be a man. That's messed up. He should have been able to say, "Hey, I'm tired, man." But to his credit, he did take responsibility. He did say it was his fault. He didn't get mad at me actually, so I was surprised by that. But we could have avoided a lot of that if he and a lot of other men were able to say we have needs, we have some vulnerabilities, and not try to just be super manly man all the time. So thanks for bringing that up, Sharon. And I do hope that in the future we have more services because I think that that will go a long way in helping our communities. So Randall says there's a common idea that the gold is in the wound. I think a lot of us are afraid to look at the father wound as purely negative, rather than that which defines who we are and can set us on our healing journey. Yeah, I mean, I think. that there is, I never heard that term gold in the wound, but I do think that, especially coming out of the Christian context, one of the things that I learned, and one of the reasons why, besides projecting my dad onto Jesus, once I stopped doing that, what attracted me to the Jesus story was that even when he was healed, he still had the scars and stuff. When people said, when Thomas, or I think said, I won't believe unless I see the marks, and he showed him his scars. And so I think that there's a lot of healing in that space for us, because we expand through those experiences if we learn from them, but also for other people who are kind of stuck on their journey. When they see and engage with other people who've been through similar things, they will sometimes become more vulnerable and allow themselves to be healed. And it can set us on our healing journey. But before you need healing, it's wounds. How can I say that? We come into the world unwounded, and then we get wounded. So the need for healing, it only exists because something painful that maybe shouldn't have happened or didn't need to happen happened first. So there's this kind of, paradox there, because being on a healing journey, you're only on a healing journey because you got wounded first. And so I think that part of what we're trying to unearth right now is what can we do to create communities and families and systems that don't require people having to go on at least this kind of healing journey. Because a lot of us get things passed on to us from the generations that came before us, because they didn't do no offense to them, because I don't know what they were going through, but they didn't go through their own healing work, and so they passed their wounds on to us. And so some of us, by grace or whatever it is, choose to heal. And then we help the future generations by not putting them through what we've gone through. There's so many things that I experienced from growing up in my time that I don't want my children to go on that journey. I want them to be able to live a life where they can be very, very curious about who they're becoming, and not come in with some script that I project onto them about who they have to be. And if anybody's met my kids before, I know at least one person up here has met my kids. My kids are off the chain, and I love it. They exhaust me in all the right ways, because they are constantly in the, and I don't try to be a roadblock to their becoming. I try to stay curious and ask them, like, why is this? Why do you want to do this? Like last night, my daughter slept in a cardboard box. I don't know why she wanted to sleep in a cardboard box, but it was very important to her to sleep in a cardboard box last night. And so I helped her set up her cardboard box, and she slept in the loft in a cardboard box. Why? I don't know. I don't know what it means. I know that this is a part of her journey. It's something that she's working through. Whether it's for joy, for fun, exploration, I have no idea. But I don't want. I know that if I said no, sleep in a cardboard box, blah, blah, and I like made it bad or wrong for some reason, I would then be wounding her needlessly, but then I'd be setting her on a healing journey. But I don't want to put her on that healing journey. I want her to have I mean, at least as little as possible for me. Of course, I'm gonna make a lot of mistakes, because I don't know what I'm doing as a father, but I know what I'm trying not to do is perpetuate the harm that I experienced, and try to give them a better opportunity to navigate life. So, but yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Randall. Yeah. Oh, this came up twice. Oh, Sharon said, we need to collaborate and leverage various systems to better serve our people. I'm concerned about the budgetary cuts and assaults on upon such programs, but it is doable. Yeah, I'm also concerned about that. Um, and you know, sometimes the resources that come from a certain system, they come with strings attached, and sometimes I think that when people who come with, give us things with strings attached, they're doing us a favor down the road by taking those strings away, and allowing us to kind of figure out how to be what we can be for each other. That's I know that in the bridging movement where I was doing a lot of work for some years, there was a grant that, I mean, excuse me, there was a program coming out called the Building Civic Bridges Act, which was going to put a bunch of money into the bridging movement, which was basically bringing people together across differences. And that was a kind of awesome on one side, but on the other side, I was like, okay, what strings are going to come with this? Because if we take this money from the government to be able to build bridges, but what if they don't build bridges the way they want us to build bridges? And then what if people get crazy sometimes when it comes to money. So I think that if the need is there and people value it, then a way will emerge. And the way can start with just doing things like this, like we're engaging with each other on Substack, right? There's other avenues where we can create out of our own abundance of healing and being a contribution and an invitational presence to people. And if we value it, then people will build it. And if they build it, it will work. So even though I'm concerned about it, I also don't think the system gives two blankety blanks about us because it wasn't designed to. You know, everything that it does that is of service is because people had to fight and they probably found some reason. No, I'm not trying to sound conspiratory, but I would imagine that it's not just purely out of benevolence, because if it was purely out of benevolence, we wouldn't have to fight so hard for some of the things that we have to fight for. So I'm hoping that in this season, many more of us start to kind of invite folks into our stories and that we share and open our hearts up to each other because of the need, because the government's not interested in doing their part. And then maybe when we start building these things ourselves, then the things that come in support will be built. It'll be designed by us, built by us. That's the kind of hope I have. So you say more often than not, our peeps don't know about or do not take advantage of services for families that are available. I mean, that's also like by design, because a lot of times they don't want us to know about those services. They might create them just for whatever reasons, but they don't put the information out there for people to get the information to know those services exist. I'll tell you some sad story. I was working with refugees in Georgia some years back. Somalian, Liberia, Kosovo, and some other areas, right? All Muslim. Now, here is a couple sad things I observed. One, the Kosovo refugees, they looked European, right? They're all Muslim, but they looked European. They had them in a completely different neighborhood that was nicer than the African Muslims from Liberia and Somalia and stuff. They were in a raggedy neighborhood that was kind of roach infested, and they had the European ones in a better neighborhood. That's wrong. Then there was a program that was to help them get lunch during the summers, and I was in charge of that. And the way they had it set up was they only gave us a certain number of meals based off of the number of kids that were signed up, but some kids could walk in. So we're given a certain number of meals, but no kids could share with each other. So if you had a bigger kid that was still hungry and a little kid that was full and they wanted to share their food, they wanted to share. We had the kids didn't eat separate. Then they would eliminate some of that food from our delivery the next day. That's terrible. And kids would be still hungry, and there would be food around, and I'd be like, I wasn't supposed to give it to the kids. And eventually I did it for about 5 or 6 days, and then I said, man, I'm not doing this. And so I started giving the kids food, and essentially I started going out inviting extra kids to come to it, and they could come if they wanted to. I got more food, then I distributed it, and then I had to basically calculate come up with some creative calculations for the food to explain why I needed so much food. And that's, I didn't want to have to do that. It was exhausting. I barely got paid any money. I was very tired, and I had to work all these extra hours so that they wouldn't take food away from the kids. But they didn't want and the people who were running it, they thought they were doing good, but they weren't, because they were operating that same like extractive system. So it was terrible. Let's see. Sharon said, for example, I've seen on IG this great program that is Black fathers, caregivers that take their children to the library. Oh yeah, I've seen that too. I think that's awesome. They're a support group for each other, and it promotes literacy. We can replicate such programs wherever we are. Absolutely, 100%. And it says we have to have people that serve as ministers of information to spread the word. Yep, absolutely. And there's some people that kind of take that on. And if we learn about things, we actually out here where I live, we have a group called the Chocolate Circle because there's not a lot of Black people here. And with the Chocolate Circle, we have a WhatsApp group, and we try to share information with each other. But a lot of times folks are so kind of exhausted by life that they don't even engage as much as they could, and because they're just exhausted with rest of life. And even if you're giving them information to try to help their lives get better, a lot of times people can't take advantage of it because there's a different part of the brain that functions that helps people make those kinds of decisions. And a lot of times we're stuck in our amygdala, which is where our fight or flight responses come from. So a lot of times we can't even do what's good for us until we can find spaces where we can rest and relax and heal, uh, just a little bit to make more room for us to be able to care for ourselves, especially if we haven't been cared for. A lot of times we repeat the patterns of not caring for ourselves because other people didn't care for us, which is sad and unfortunate. But as we heal, as I said before, hurt people, but healed people can help heal people. So I'm noticing that I've been rambling for quite some time. So I appreciate everyone popping up here, and I hope that we'll be able to do more of these. And I actually have a massive headache right now, so I'm talking through a headache. But I had already scheduled it, so I wanted to make sure that I showed up. But I really appreciate everyone up here. I'm going to continue to write about this in a couple of days. I think I'll have the YouTube video for the Father's Day conversation that I led at this unity community. And one of the things we talk about is the masculine relationship with the feminine and how we have to overcome this false polarization and understand that these energies are meant to work in harmony with one another. And hey, Egberto, you take care too. So yeah, I appreciate it. And Sharon, thank you. I appreciate you for being up here and for engaging. And thank you. You take care of yourself as well. And I have some more. I have about 50 pieces of writing in the queue, but some people told me I write too much all at once anymore. I kind of just slowly nurture it like a garden and then share them as I feel called. But I'm going to try to do more videos and other ways of engaging. Thanks, Randall. Thank you for being up here too. And yeah, let's keep doing this. And everything that I do it in conversation with people, whether I know them or don't know them. It's in conversation to who we're becoming. That's what it's about. We've been, especially people who have been um, oppressed or suppressed, those sorts of things. We um, we need to have a future orientation, which I'm going to write more about because we already know what the past is, and there's enough people trying to take us backwards. So if we fight in that kind of like backwards energy, we're actually sometimes doing some of the work for them unintentionally. But if we have a future orientation that's full of possibilities and we ground ourselves in a future that is uh, that has room for us, because there's plenty of room in the future. In the past, there was no room for us. In the future, there's plenty of room. So if we take ownership of the future, and I've been working on something I'm calling future informed indigeneity. I know what I mean when I say it, but I want to help other people be able to visualize that and ground and root themselves in the future of their becoming and make that as real to them as anything that's in the past, maybe more real, and creating from that place, informing from that place, meeting people from that place where we're realizing a future in our present moment. So thanks. And then Sharon said, my fam had wonderful friends from Cape Verde. We're good global people and have the solutions we need. Yeah, we do. We have everything we need, except for we have to find the will and the way and to find each other. But appreciate you. And thanks everybody. Take care.